Ever heard of the Rothschilds before? They are one of the most fascinating families. The influence that they had has had such an impact on the world's economy. And because of this, they've made themselves the centerpiece of countless conspiracy theories, ranging from the Illuminati to controlling the entire world and a lot more. So stick around for the next 15, maybe 20 minutes. I'm going to break down who they are, what role they play in society today, and why they are the center of so many conspiracy theories. How and when did the Rothschild banking dynasty begin? Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in 1743 in a Jewish ghetto in what's now Frankfurt, Germany. He grew up raised by a father that was a collectible coin dealer. His father passed away when he was young, and he wound up going to an orphanage. As a teenager, he apprenticed at the banking house in Hanover, and he worked a lot of odd jobs in his late teens. By his early 20s, Amschel had returned back to Frankfurt, where he opened up his own coin dealership. He dealt in this trade, in the coin trade, for most of his 20s. And he learned the trade inside and out. He became really proficient. And through this shop, he was able to meet and have access to a lot of the most powerful people in all of Europe. A lot of the people that were coin collectors and were buying these items that he sold were aristocrats. In his early 30s, he secured a very important patronage with a man named Wilhelm IX, who was one of the richest men in all of Europe at the time. After several years of building this relationship with Wilhelm IX, he wound up becoming, he was in his early 30s at this point, he wound up becoming the personal banker to Wilhelm IX, where he now had access to an enormous financial network and very large-scale capital. This was where he first began to understand the industry of banking and how money worked and what roles a bank plays in society. When he got into his late 30s, early 40s, he then transitioned into government finance, which again was a huge step forward in his career and gave him a much larger scope of control and a much larger pool of capital. During this period, he shifted entirely away from coin dealing to large-scale international commerce and banking. And with this access to all this capital, he was able to develop relationships with many of the biggest bankers and banking institutions all across Europe. Probably the biggest singular career advancement that occurred for Amschel Rothschild was during the Napoleonic Wars. Just about every other European nation at the time, they were all mobilized to fight against Napoleon in Napoleon's attack on the rest of Europe. Many governments at this time actually didn't have the cash on hand to fight these wars, so they had two options: either liquidate every asset we have, which can take a very long time to do, or we go to some of the biggest banks, like the Rothschilds, and we secure loans with these biggest banks in Europe. And this was a very pivotal point in European history, because after the Napoleonic Wars, a lot of the power had shifted from governments to now the big banks in Europe. The big banks were owed by all different governments in Europe billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. Now, at this time, which was 1803, Amschel Rothschild was based in Frankfurt still. But these wars helped him expand and internationalize his business. Now, something you very well may have heard of before is Amschel Rothschild had 5 sons. And what the Rothschilds did that was unique at this time is he sent all 5 of his sons to the 5 biggest cities in Europe. So Amschel Rothschild's first son, also named Amschel Rothschild, stayed in Frankfurt, and he managed the family's original banking house. He helped control German relations and ran the family headquarters. Solomon Mayer Rothschild went to Vienna, where he founded the Austrian branch. Nathan Mayer Rothschild went to London, where he developed and founded N.M. Rothschild and Sons. He became far and away the most financially aggressive and honestly the most prosperous of all the Rothschild children. London is where they sprouted into superstardom in European banking at this time. Karl Mayer Rothschild went to Paris, where he founded the French branch, where he would go on to become one of the most pertinent, influential bankers in all of France. Jacob Mayer Rothschild went to Naples, where he would go on to establish the branch servicing what was called the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. Through this branch, they handled all Mediterranean affairs and relationships with the Italian government. From there, all five sons were able to work in a very coordinated effort between all of each other to sort of monopolize European banking. They financed the growth of pretty much all of Europe, almost all, industrial growth, commerce growth, real estate growth that happened in Europe in this time period after like 1810, 1815 maybe, was financed by the Rothschilds. And it became a really interesting snowball type of effect where the more money that the Rothschilds would lend out to European governments, the more in debt these European governments would be to the Rothschilds. And every time they would borrow money from these banks would get more and more powerful, and the governments would get less and less powerful, which is one of the sources or emanation points as to why they're so shrouded in secrecy and conspiracy theories. Now, in the 1930s is when the Rothschild family started to see some effects from the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. Many Jewish-owned businesses, as we well know now, including some of the Rothschilds branches in Vienna and Paris, suffered the effects of the rise of Nazism. Now, the Austrian branch in Vienna was what was called Aryanized. And Aryanized basically just means the Nazis came in, seized control over all their funds and all of their assets, and it became Nazi property, if you want to call it that. The same thing happened in France, where the Rothschilds lost control of their branch in Paris. But the branch in London, very interestingly, being obviously in Great Britain, which was an allied force, Great Britain suffered a little bit during the war just because all commerce in Europe did at that time. But right after the war, the London branch saw a huge uptick in the assets that they had and the influence that they had in Europe. And I don't know about all, but a significant percentage of all of the lost assets from Vienna and from Paris wound up being recovered and were put under the control of the branch in London. Now, I want to be very clear, there is no verifiable evidence that the Rothschilds had any involvement or were connected to Germany in any way during World War II. This is one of the bigger conspiracy theories surrounding them, that they helped fund World War II and that they were secretly behind the Nazis and had some influence over it. The Rothschilds themselves are a Jewish family. Now, a very interesting fact that I do want to highlight is prior to Hitler's rise to power, the The Rothschilds notably had a very good relationship, or at least were in frequent communication with Hitler and with some of his early officials in Germany. As a matter of fact, very ironically, post-World War I, Hitler and Germany used millions and millions of dollars of funding from the Rothschilds to help rebuild Germany, which of course is what helped Hitler get to power, as he did bring financial prosperity back to Germany after World War I. There are two noteworthy deaths from the Nazis murdering members of the Rothschild family. One is Elizabeth de Rothschild. She died at the Ravensbrück concentration camp in 1945. The second was Joanna Rothschild, where she was deported to the Lodz ghetto. She died at Auschwitz. Now, about those two deaths, both Joanna and Elizabeth, that are the only two recorded deaths, have been reported as being sort of black sheep to the Rothschild family dynasty. They didn't play much of a role in the family business. They were not well liked by many different accounts by other members of the family. Now, post-World War II, the Rothschilds shifted from being involved, openly being involved in international politics, geopolitics. After World War II, they became very quiet. They were not as public, they were not as vocal, they were much more behind the scenes, still very much in control, still very influential, but sort of 3 feet back. So, were the Rothschilds simply victims of the Nazi Party, just like everybody else in Europe at that time? Or is it possible that they evaded persecution and continued prosperity post-World War II because of some under-the-table deal or some intertwinement with the Nazi Party? I have no idea. That's up for you to decide. As I mentioned, after World War II, the London branch continued immense growth and an enormous amount of prosperity. The Vienna branch and the Paris branch during the war got seized by the Germans, got destroyed. Those ceased to exist. However, a lot of assets from those two branches wound up after the war. These assets wound up back in control of the Rothschilds through the London branch. In 1981, 1982, they suffered a big hit to their business by the election of French socialist president Francois Mitterrand. He nationalized most of France's banks, taking away significant control from the Rothschilds. In the early 2000s, the Rothschilds merged their businesses together, creating one singular banking entity. This was the first reunification of the family since the 19th century. More recently, in 2018, Alexander de Rothschild became executive chairman of Rothschild & Co., succeeding his father, David de Rothschild. Today, the firm mainly focuses on M&A advisory, private banking, asset management, and restructuring sovereign debt. They're involved in various philanthropic foundations, such as the Yad Hanadiv Foundation, which funded major Israeli institutions, including the Knesset and the Supreme Court for Israel. Now, in terms of what they own today, this is a subject shrouded in secrecy and the source of a lot of conspiracy theories. Rothschild & Co. can be thought of as almost like a parent company. They have literally hundreds of different subsidiaries, so it's very difficult to decipher exactly what they own, but you can look at the parent company and you can look at the holdings of all the subsidiaries. Now, if you do just a basic Google search and you say, what does the Rothschild family own? What do they control today? The very first thing you'll see is only a couple $1 billion. They don't control much. They don't own much. However, when you follow the breadcrumb trail, the opposite makes itself evident. The scope of assets that they own/manage is kind of astonishing. I want to read off to you just a few of their holdings so you have an idea of exactly what they control and how much influence they still have. So this is equity that they have in these companies. This is the total value of the shares of stock that they own in these companies. $79 billion in Nvidia, $67 billion in Apple, $46 billion in JP Morgan Chase, $43 billion in Alphabet or Google, $37 billion in Microsoft, $33 billion in Berkshire Hathaway, and they own hundreds of millions of dollars of equity in companies like Amazon, Bank of America, Verizon, Citi, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, all these different huge financial institutions. They have their toes dipped in the water of these companies. The total amount reported that they either own or assets, the value of assets that they manage, is somewhere on the order of $7 trillion. There's also long been speculation that they have some influence over the Federal Reserve and the National Bank of England. Now, one of the points that I personally find most interesting about the Rothschilds is throughout all of the destruction that happened from World War I, World War II, and everything that's transpired since, they have remained pretty much the only staple that we know of in the world that has maintained power throughout this entire time. That I find amazing. But as far as conspiracy theories go, that's obviously the fun, interesting thing to talk about. I think that if I were to talk just from my perspective, they have a lot more power and influence than they're leading on. I think that they understand the game, and they understand that being loud and vocal is not a good thing when it comes to controlling as much as you can. I think it's obvious that they do control a bunch, but they're very smartly kind of discreet and below the radar in how they operate. Does that mean that they are the Illuminati and that they all gather around in black hoods and meet in the forest and burn, some kind of a symbol or something at nighttime? I have no idea. I have no clue. But I would love to know what you think. So leave a comment below. Let me know if you found this interesting. Let me know if you have a different opinion, if you agree. And I'll see you in the next episode.